During the Gilded Age, 1870s to 1900s, when poor working conditions and long workdays had a negative effect on people's health and well-being, 2,500 people gathered at Haymarket Square on May 4, 1886 in Chicago, Illinois, to protest against the tragedy of poor working conditions demanding better. This protest turned to chaos when an onlooker threw a bomb into the crowd and killed 8 civilians and wounded numerous others. However, the protesters were triumphant when their 8-hour workday demand was finally enforced. Labor history was changed forever with this new law, but relationships between employers and workers became tense, with each person having different views about their work. According to William J. Edelman from Illinois Labor History Society, Illinois workers and federal employees were supposed to have been covered by an 8-hour workday law since 1867. The problem was that the federal government failed to enforce its own law, and in Illinois, employers forced workers to sign layers of the law as conditions of employment. On May 1, 1886, rallies were held all over the United States to begin a movement towards an 8-hour workday. More than 300,000 workers from 13,000 businesses walked out of their jobs across the country to demand for better working rights. In the following days, more workers joined in the movement, and the number of strikers grew to almost 100,000. 52 years after the Haymarket Riot in 1938, the New Deal's Fair Labor Standards Act finally made the 8-hour workday legal throughout the nation. During the Industrial Revolution and the Gilded Age, most men, women, and children worked as laborers in sweatshops, coal mines, and factories. Men and women worked 14 to 16 hours a day. The men earned 10 cents per hour or $89 per week, but the women got only 1/3 to 1/2 the pay that the men got. Children worked 14-hour days and paid less than 10 cents an hour. The machines and the work methods the laborers used were dangerous, and many injuries and fatalities occurred. The Triangle Shirtwaist factory fire is a classic example of a disaster that occurred due to the conditions inside of the factory. Fabric inside of the sweatshop caught fire and tore through the building. There were no fire escapes and all of the doors were locked, so the workers were trapped inside. A total of 145 people died. Factory worker John Aylett was an eyewitness to a machine accident inside of a factory involving a little boy. He said, "A child was working with wool, that is, to prepare the wool from the machine, but the strap caught him, as he was hardly awake, and it carried him into the machinery, and we found one limb in one place, one in another, and he was cut to bits. His whole body went in and was mangled." In 1819, Surgeon Michael Ward said, "Accidents were very often admitted to the infirmary, through the children's hands and arms having been caught in machinery. In many instances, the muscle and the skin is stripped down in the bone, and in some instances, a finger or two might be lost." While working as laborers, most people lived in slums. According to Ankar Potter from IndustrialRevolution.com, 5 to 9 people lived in a single room, which was as big as an apartment. Not only was there not enough room, but more people got sick as well. Because everyone lived in terrible conditions and so close to one another, diseases spread rapidly, and lack of medicine and medical care resulted in many deaths. On Monday, May 3, 1886, Chicago police attacked and killed picketing workers at the McCormick Reaper plant. After this incident, laborers organized a protest, which was to be held at Haymarket Square in Chicago, Illinois for the following night. The people wanted to protest against the killings by police and to demand for an 8-hour workday and better working conditions. On the day of the meeting, flyers were printed in a print shop run by Albert Parsons and were handed out to people to promote the meeting. An employee of the print shop met with the mayor of Chicago, and both men had agreed that the meeting was to be a non-violent, quiet type of meeting. That evening, 2,500 people gathered in Haymarket Square instead of the expected 20,000. According to William J. Edelman from Illinois Labor History Society, he said, "The Haymarket meeting was almost over, and only about 200 people remained when they were attacked by 176 policemen carrying Winchester repeater rifles. As this was happening, an unidentified person threw a handmade bomb into the crowd of people." According to David Matthews from Flinter.com, it was the first peacetime use of a dynamite bomb in U.S. history. After the bomb was thrown, police panicked and started shooting, and ended up shooting many of their own men in the darkness. 7 policemen died and only 1 death due to the bomb. 4 workers were also killed and dozens others were wounded. The tragedy of this night was not just the killing and wounding of numerous people who held in peaceful protests to demand for better working rights. 8 men, August Pease 31, Albert Parsons 37, Louis Lang 21, Adolf Fisher 27, George Engel 50, Oscar Neebe 35, Samuel Frieden 39, and Michael Schwab 32 were arrested and summoned to court. The men were anarchists and played a large role in the labor movement, which was the main reason for their arrest. Only 2 of the men, Samuel Frieden and Michael Schwab, were present at the Haymarket meeting. The trial began on July 16, 1886. The Chicago Tribune, one of the most read newspapers in Chicago, offered to pay money to the jury who found the 8 men guilty. The trial was 2 months long and ranks as one of the most notorious events in American history. On August 19, 1886, the men were found guilty and 7 were sentenced to death by hanging. The 8th man, Oscar Neal, was given 15 years of hard labor. After the 8 men were convicted, they appealed the verdict to the State Supreme Court of Illinois. On September 14, 1887, the Illinois State Supreme Court rejected the appeal and upheld the lower court's ruling. The defendants appealed again, this time to the United States Supreme Court. However, in November of that same year, it was denied. The men then made a last-ditch clemency effort to the governor. Several famous writers voiced criticism of the trial and urged mercy. A former Illinois U.S. Senator and various Chicago civic leaders urged the governor to grant at least some of the convicted men mercy. Finally, on November 10, 1887, the sentences of Samuel Feeden and Michael Schwab, who had requested mercy in writing, had their sentences reduced to life in prison. The others were set to die as scheduled. On the night before his scheduled execution, Louis Link smuggled dynamite caps into a cell, put them into his mouth, and committed suicide. On November 11, 1887, George Engel, Adolph Fisher, August Spies, and Albert Parsons were executed. On June 26, 1893, Illinois Governor John P. Elkett pardoned Neeb, Schwab, and Feeden in order to right what he thought was a judicial wrong. Although this tragedy, the men being convicted of the bomb throwing, when they may have never been guilty, they are triumphant because the events that took place in Haymarket Square helped raise awareness about labor laws and enforce an 8-hour workday. The American Federation of Labor was formed in December 1886. It was a less radical group of labor workers who wanted to fight to protect the rights of workers. Their goal was to achieve shorter working hours, higher wages, and better working conditions. Even to this day, they still fight for the rights of the American worker. After the Haymarket riot, relations between workers and business owners became more tense than they had been, with each side feeling a war with the other. In July 1892, in Homestead, Pennsylvania, at the Carnegie Steel Company's plant, there was a confrontation between workers and employers. It is known as the Homestead Strike. According to the American Social Reform Movement, the plant manager announced that, in spite of a contract with union members guaranteeing a certain wage, pay would be cut significantly. Workers refused to accept the pay cut. Thus, manager Henry Clay Frick shut down the plant, intending to reopen it with strikebreakers. The company sent 300 men from the Pinkerton Detective Agency to defend the company's property and escort replacement workers into the plant. Shots were exchanged between the Pinkerton men and the striking workers. 7 workers and 3 armed guards died, and the Pinkerton employees surrendered. 2 years later, in May of 1894, a similar incident known as the Pullman Strike occurred in Chicago, Illinois. After receiving a pay cut for the 5th time, workers at the Pullman Palace Car Company went on strike with the support of the American Railway Union. Together, the striking workers shut down numerous railway lines. However, a U.S. District Court judge in Chicago ordered the workers to stop interfering with the operation of the railroads. U.S. President Grover Cleveland sent federal troops to Chicago to enforce the judge's order. When the troops arrived in Chicago on July 4th, riots broke out and they struggled to take control over the people. 30 workers were killed, dozens more were wounded, and several hundred were arrested. The Pullman strike was ended, and so was the American Railway Union. The Haymarket Square riot and the public debate it generated proved to be an important moment in the transformation of 19th century liberalism. Within the decade after 1886, leading businessmen, politicians, judges, reformers, and journalists, many of them the same people who had dissented against the Haymarket verdict, would accept the need for collective bargaining and arbitration to resolve labor disputes and advocate measures of progressive reform. In July 1889, at a labor conference in Paris, France, a delegate from the American Federation of Labor recommended that May 1st be recognized as International Labor Day in memory of the Haymarket martyrs and the injustice of the Haymarket riot. Since that day, it has been referred to as May Day or International Workers' Day, and this day celebrates workers' rights. Most of the world celebrates this day on May 1st with demonstrations, commemorations, and vacations for the working class. However, the United States does not. When the U.S. began to seriously consider an official workers' holiday, officials were divided on whether to honor the movement's origins on this day or distance themselves from it because of its violent associations. President Grover Cleveland was worried about the political threat of anarchists and socialists, and also felt a May 1st holiday would become a memorial to the Haymarket bombing. However, he did want to honor and celebrate the American workers, so in 1894, he proclaimed the first Monday in September as Labor Day. Radicals occasionally tried to revive May Day, but most U.S. unions, like those in the American Federation of Labor, did not agree. To honor the men who were executed for their alleged roles in the Haymarket bombing, the Haymarket Martyrs Monument was built in Forest Home Cemetery in Chicago, where most of the executed men are buried. Etched into the bottom of the monument are the final words of August Spies. The day will come when our silence will be more powerful than the voices you are throttling today. These words will forever remind people of the tragedy that is the Haymarket riot and the injustice that the Haymarket 8 endured.